What's up guys? Cody Bidlow with ATHLETE.X. Today I'm going to be talking to you about hill sprints, how to apply them to your program, how to incorporate them in your year of training, how to do a workout with hill sprints, and why you should do it. So while you're here, please subscribe to my YouTube channel below. If you haven't checked it out yet, catch me on Instagram at ATHLETE.X, on Twitter at Cody Bidlow, and my website, ATHLETE.X.us. Through all those channels, you can find my articles, my videos, my training programs I sell, all that stuff. I even got free training on my website, so feel free to check that out, download it, use it, whatever you want. It's free to use. So when it comes to doing hill sprints, all right, the biggest thing you need to understand is that they're best used as a preparatory tool so that later in the year you could do sprints on the track, do them fast, do a lot of them, but you're not going to be burnt out because you've been doing sprints on the track since day one of your season or day one of your training season. So use the hill sprints as a way to prepare yourself and get your body ready for those fast sprints to come. So how do we do that? How do we prepare ourselves for the work that's going to come later by doing hill sprints? Well, first of all, you can use them to develop capacity. So if we want to call it anaerobic capacity or acceleration capacity, whatever you want, that would be doing things like 10s, 20s, and 30s with short rest periods, focusing on really building that battery. We can kind of think of it as building your base in a way that is specific to sprinting and the demands of the sprint races. If you want to develop acceleration more from a technical standpoint and a force output standpoint, that's where you're going to do the same, 10s, 20s, 30s, and 40s maybe, but you're going to do them with longer rest periods, high quality, not fatigued when you enter that next rep, so each one you do is at a full, all-out, maximum intensity. Now, if you want to extend it out a little bit further, maybe you're a 200 runner, maybe you're prepping for the 100 and you really want to just get that back end of your race put together really well. Well, you could use hills for that too. We got glycolytic capacity, which would be doing like 40s, 60s, 80s with a short rest period. So say you run a sprint, turn around, come back, do another sprint with short rest. That's glycolytic capacity. Or glycolytic power. Maybe that's doing an 80-meter hill, but doing it as hard as you can with full recovery, similar to a speed endurance rep. That's going to really build your ability to go in one bout, one rep, as hard as you can. So those are kind of the basic uses for us as sprinters on how you can use hill sprints to develop yourself, particularly in your preseason. Now, I would focus on going from capacity to power over time. So maybe earlier in the preseason you're focusing on acceleration capacity, and then you progress to acceleration development. Maybe later in the preseason you do some glycolytic capacity and then progress to glycolytic power with your hill sprints. So keep that in mind. Now, if you're an endurance athlete, you could still use hills to benefit you. Say you run the 800 or the mile. Well, if you do hill sprints, I would do them in the glycolytic power or glycolytic capacity range. You could even do them longer than that, and that'll help develop your endurance, kind of give you some power endurance, as I would like to call it, so that when you're running, say you're at the cross-country race and you got a hill climb at the end of your course. Well, when you go back to preseason, you did 120-meter hill repeats, that should be no problem. So really, hills can be used by anyone. Even if you're not a competitive athlete, you can use hills in kind of an intervals type setup to burn fat, improve your hormonal release, all that type of thing. So across the board, people can benefit from hill sprints. So hopefully you find a way to incorporate hill sprints into your program so they can benefit you just as much as they've benefited me and other people I know who sprint. So some of the benefits of sprinting on hills, first, you can develop acceleration mechanics. So because of the whole body angle that you're going to be at when you're going up the hill, it's going to be similar to the positions that you're in when you're accelerating in that early part of your race or early part of your sprint. So you can develop acceleration mechanics if you consider using proper mechanics and then just apply that to being on the hill. That can help transfer those qualities that you're developing on the hill onto the track in your acceleration mechanics. You're also going to be building strength that is specific to the positions and postures of acceleration. So that's one reason why it transfers so well, because you're developing strength, power, explosive capabilities, all of those great things we want, but you're developing them in positions, postures, and movement sequences that are specific to sprinting. So that's where you're going to get that transfer. Now, if you do, say you're developing power, but it's in no way similar to sprinting, well, it's going to be harder to transfer that. So hills are a great way to develop power, explosive capabilities, and all that, but in a way that is specific to the mechanics of sprinting and thus transferable. One thing that hills are great for is they teach you to project up and out, not just up and not just out. Oftentimes when we get people on the track, especially earlier in the year, they get on the track and when they run, they just push straight out, and then their hips drop, they contact the ground with their foot moving forward, they contact too far in front of their center of mass, and essentially they're already putting on the brakes by step 2 or 3 of their sprint. And many times that leads to ankle injuries, shin splints, things like that. So by using the hill and doing it properly, you can teach yourself or your athletes to project up and out, which is ultimately what we want to do, right? When we're at max velocity, we're fully upright. When we start in the blocks, we're fully crouched. So how do we go from there to there? How do we go from a crouch position to an upright position? We project up and out each step over the course of our acceleration. Now we don't just stand up the first step, just projecting up, and we don't just stay low through the whole acceleration, just projecting out. We go up and out simultaneously. So the hill is a great way to develop that, especially if you got, the proper angle of a hill. It's smooth, so you can really put yourself out there and work hard. Hills are great for that. By nature, the hills that you sprint are going to slow you down. So the sprints that you're doing are slightly slower than what you're going to be doing on the track. So not only is that good from a progression standpoint, you want to start out the year slower than when you finish. So by changing your environment, changing your footwear, things like that, you can bring the intensity down without bringing your intent down, if that makes sense. I'm still trying to run as hard as I can, but I'm not going as fast as I can, so the stress is not equivalent, to as if it were me putting out a full max velocity sprint on the track. So I can still work as hard as possible, try to run as hard as I can, but the overall stress is not that high, and it allows you to naturally progress from earlier in the year on grass, in shoes, going up a hill. Then later in the year, maybe you go on the track with shoes, and then maybe you're on the track with spikes. Well, that's a natural way to progress your speed and your intensity over time while still always feeling like you're going as hard as you can. That's one way you can kind of keep some intensity in your back pocket for later in the training season or later in your preseason, so that way you don't just get burnt out, by month 2 of your preseason because you've been blasting speed since day 1 on the track. So one thing hills are great for is teaching people how to properly push. Some people have trouble with what it feels like in early acceleration to push themselves and then have that lead to a projection up and out like I talked about before. So training on the hill, oftentimes it's going to help someone learn what it's like to push without really having to give them many cues. It's going to basically put them in an environment where they're forced to push well, and if they don't, they're going to be slow and get beat by all their teammates. So you will learn how to push properly when you're training on a hill. Hill sprints can teach you what it's like to feel the rhythmic progression of acceleration. Once again, we're slowing things down by being on a hill, by being on grass, and by being in shoes. So because it's slowed down a bit, not intentionally by the person who's sprinting, but just by the environment that they're in, it's going to give them, the athlete or you as an athlete, the opportunity to feel your technique a bit more, slow things down a bit, and mentally be able to really absorb what's going on. As early in the preseason, you're not technically sound. You've been probably sitting on the couch for a while or just lifting weights or whatever. So when you get on the hill, you're able to feel what it's like to sprint, but it's slowed down just a bit so you can be more tuned in, feel what's going on, and then as time goes on and you get faster, you're learning what it feels like to sprint again, but in a way that's a little bit easier to absorb that information and feel what your body's doing. Feel out, I'm kind of tight here, or that movement feels a little off. Well, by being on the hill, you slow it down a little bit so that you can speed it up later in the year. You can also use hill workouts to modify your plyometric programs. Say you want to do alternate leg bounding, which is one of the few things that directly correlates to fairly fast sprints, say from 10.5 to 10.8. That's one of the few, basically the only exercises that is proven to correlate directly to sprint performance in that range. So now if you want to modify your bounding workouts, you could bound up a hill that isn't that steep, or you could do double leg bounds like frog jumps or repeated broad jumps or whatever. You could do those up a hill, and that's a way to modify those workouts, still keep them specific to sprinting, but change them up just a bit so your body doesn't get stagnant with how it responds to those and how it develops in response to doing those types of jumps and bounds and other plyometric activities. Now, when it comes to picking a hill, you want to pick a hill that's somewhere between 5 and 20 degrees of incline. I know that's a pretty big range, but realistically you're not going to have that much choice as to how many hills you have access to. Partly due to the fact that you want something that's on grass, preferably smooth. Dirt would be okay if it wasn't too soft or too hard and wasn't full of holes or anything like that. So like I said, 5 to 20 degrees approximately. Aim for something with some smooth grass. If not, aim for some dirt. And last but not least, you could always go on something with concrete or asphalt. Just understand that the impact on your legs is going to be greater, and you probably want to reserve that for later in your preseason once you've been used to sprinting up the hill on grass or on dirt, and before you transition to the track. That's when it might be okay to use concrete or asphalt. But once again, it's one of those things where the risk-reward ratio has to be there, has to be in your favor for you to choose to do that. So if you have someone who's prone to shin splints, don't throw them on there. But if you have someone who has shins built like iron and they never get shin splints, it might be okay for them to run up concrete for a couple sessions. I don't advise you to do that, but you can, and you can do it without getting hurt. It's just risky. Preferably you want something that's at least 30 meters in length, but up to 60 or more, because that gives you variety as far as the types of workouts you can do. Like I said, you could do capacity workouts, you could do power workouts. You could run for 30 meters and get a different effect than if you're running for 60 meters. And if you have a variety of athletes, so you have 100-meter runners, 400 runners, 800 runners, they're all going to have different demands as far as how long the hill is that they should run. So the longer your hill, if it's a consistent incline all the way up, the better off you're going to be to train all of your athletes in all the ways they need it, or just to give yourself the variety you need or you want to get the most out of your program with your hill sprints. It would be preferable to have a hill that has a consistent incline, but if it kind of increases a little bit at the end or levels off like a plateau, that's okay. But the goal would be to find one that has a fairly consistent incline for the entire length of the hill, or at least of the entire length of the hill that you're going to run. So I talked about it before, but as far as the types of workouts that you can do on a hill, first and foremost I would say is acceleration capacity. That's where you're going to do 10s, 20s, 30s. Maybe you do 3 by 3 by 30, where you go sprint to 30, walk back down, sprint to 30, walk back down, sprint to 30, and then you have 5 minutes rest, and then you do that set again 2 more times. That's acceleration capacity. We're shortening the rest, or challenging your neurotransmitters, or challenging all the energy delivery systems in your body to recover as quick as possible for that next sprint. Now, once you've done capacity for a while, then you can get into acceleration development. That's where you're going to be doing, say you did the same workout pretty much, 9 sets of 30-meter sprints, or rather 9 reps of 30-meter sprints, but each one of those was done with full recovery at maximal intensity. So you're running as hard as you can, recovering as much as you can, and then repeating for the length of the workout. That's where you're going to develop the quality of acceleration, truly how fast you're accelerating, how powerful you're getting up that hill, whereas the capacity workouts are more for building the battery so that later in the year when you're doing that acceleration development work, you have the required energy and energy delivery capabilities in your body to supply the energy needed for those acceleration development workouts. So you can also use hill sprints for glycolytic capacity and glycolytic power. Same idea as the acceleration capacity and the acceleration development. The only difference is the distances you use are going to be different. So for glycolytic capacity, now you're going 40, 60, maybe even 80 meters, go up, walk back down, go up, walk back down. Short rest in between the reps, longer rest in between your sets. That's going to challenge those energy delivery mechanisms, those waste management systems in the body, dealing with all the excess crap basically that's accumulated when you're working hard consistently over 10 seconds or longer. So once again, that glycolytic capacity is going to come from longer sprints done in that same manner of short rest periods between those repetitions. For glycolytic power, it's the same thing as acceleration development, but the distances are longer. So for glycolytic power, that's where we're going to do 60s, 80s up the hill, as hard as you can, and then full recovery in between those reps. As far as coaching cues go, it depends on where you are in your hill sprint. So early on, we're going to want to feel a push cue. So push the ground away behind you, or push the ground away under you. Experiment with those cues. See which one feels best for you. Feels like you really get out with some power, launching, projecting out of that start. Another cue for early on in the sprint is to throw the knee and throw the elbow. So when you drive the knee and you drive your arm, you want to throw those elbows forward, throw that knee forward, launch them up the hill. That's what's going to help generate you momentum as you push into the ground, generate more momentum, generate more of an impulse to launch you through the air each stride. Once you've been going for a few strides, now you want to get into what I call punching. Okay? You want to feel like boom, like a Bruce Lee punch. Got bugs flying at me right here. Sorry. But you want to feel punching the ground, okay? If you just continue to push, push tends to be slow. Push tends to equate to a long ground contact time. That's great during your first few steps of the sprint, but once you've developed a little bit of momentum and you're going now you need to punch. You need to get that foot down, get it off the ground. On the ground, off the ground, all right? Punch. So once you've been, like I said, a few strides into the sprint, now you want to get into a punching cue. You also want to start gradually rising, getting your posture to rise as you project up and out, up the hill. Late in your hill sprint, that's where you want to rise fully upright. You want to continue to project up and out up the hill, and you want to maximize your stride frequency. Stride length and stride frequency both increase throughout your acceleration. So towards the end of your hill sprint is where you want to have your maximal stride frequency going on, and you want to be sending yourself once again up and out to get up the hill. Through the entire length of the sprint, while you're sprinting on the hill, you want to feel that when you've locked out the leg, maybe not lock out is the right term, but when your push or your ground contact is finished, you want to feel a little boom, a little pop off of the ground, up and out, like I've said many times so far. Okay, that's very important. When we talk about wanting to sprint tall, we're talking about being able to launch ourselves up without really sinking too much, having our hips drop, having our knee have too much bend when it's in the middle of our stride pattern. So with the hills, you can work on that. You can work on that last end range pop, launching yourself up the hill without being low in the hips, looking like you're basically lunging up the hill. Okay, so throughout the entire hill sprint, you want to feel that. Right as your hip, your knee, and your ankle are hitting close to triple extension, as one might say, you really want to feel a pop, a projection, an impulse, whatever it is that resonates with you, something that launches you through that last end range of motion in the leg. So now that we've talked about some of the ideas behind hill sprints, we're going to go through a workout. So today what I'm doing is 30s. I'm going to go work on an acceleration capacity workout today. So I'm going to sprint up the hill, walk back down, sprint up the hill, walk back down. We're going to go like that.